This is Girls Stop Playing, a weekly show that empowers Black women to stop playing with their potential so they can live a life that they love. I'm Koereyelle, your favorite homegirl, and I'm on a mission to help Black women make the money and get the honey. You can have it all as long as you're willing to work. Welcome back to another episode of the Girls Stop Playing podcast. It's your favorite homegirl, Koereyelle, here to encourage you to stop playing with your potential and start working for what you want in life and in love. You already know that I'm bringing you the information and the conversations to help you make the money and get the honey. You can have it all as long as you are willing to work. And if you are connected with me on Instagram, which hopefully you are, that's one of my favorite places to hang out, you already know that I had this whole selfish summer going where I was really focusing on intentionally investing in self-care, taking the sin out of the concept of being selfish. And then I hosted an entire virtual summit to help y'all intentionally invest in wellness as well. And so as I'm on my journey, I'm constantly connecting with amazing women, going down these rabbit holes, doing my research, signing myself up for all of these different modalities and therapies and all of these things that I'm trying on my healing journey. And one of the modalities, I guess, that I have stumbled across, and you may have heard of it as well, is called EMDR. If you don't know about it, which I just know a little bit about it, we're going to find out more about it in today's episode. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Melissa Dumas. Now, I don't know if I butchered your last name, so I am definitely going to start by giving you an opportunity to introduce yourself and let the audience know who is Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. You were close. It is Melissa Dumas, and you were not the first to get it wrong. It happens, but thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Melissa Dumas. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist located in California. I am specially trained in EMDR. It is my jam. I absolutely love it. I also provide holistic healing coaching for women as well. I'm a mom of 3. I'm married. This month will make 14 years that my husband and I have been married. I also have a podcast called the Hats Podcast for ambitious women that, as you said, want it all, want to do it all and live it all, but we want to do it with style and grace, and also while prioritizing our self-care. So that's extremely important to me, and teaching other women how to do it. But the topic today, EMDR, I'm passionate about. Self-care, I'm passionate about. So I'm super excited to be here and super excited for today's topic.
So I want to jump in at something you said, which is wanting to, have it all and do it all. And as Black women specifically, my audience is like 99.999% Black women. So that is who we're talking to. That's who I'm going to be referencing. But a lot of successful, high achieving, high earning Black women who have accomplished the things and checked off the goals and, from the outside looking in, have all of the things to be proud of, can still be neglecting self-care. What are some ways that we could be going after all of these things, seemingly doing the damn thing, but unknowingly really neglecting ourselves?
Absolutely. One of the biggest questions I like to ask is, what are those thoughts? What are those feelings that you have at the end of your day when you lay your head on that pillow? Because that internal conversation that you're having with yourself will be like the litmus paper to let us know, like, okay, like, yeah, I killed that day, or, oh, I did great at that presentation, but I'm really dissatisfied here. I'm unsatisfied in my relationship, or I yelled at my kids today and that doesn't make me feel good. That conversation is really clues to let you know what are the areas in which I need to be addressing.
Okay, I have a random side question that has nothing to do with anything. You said the inner dialogue, and I read a thread that said that some people don't have an inner dialogue. Since you're a therapist, I just assume you know the answer to this, but is that the case? Do some people not have an inner dialogue? And if not, what do they have?
That is the first time I've heard that. From my experience working as a therapist, everyone has an inner dialogue. It's that inner
Okay.
voice, whether it is helpful, unhelpful. And even if that inner dialogue is silent, then I would ask the question, how busy are you? Is your busyness preventing you from getting in touch with that inner dialogue? Because busyness is a form of self medication too. Sometimes we don't want to hear from that inner dialogue. So we are consistently making ourselves busy, surrounding ourselves with other people, the voices of other people, scrolling, which is another form of like other people's words and messages. And we're not taking the time to really get to know what's happening on the inside for us.
Ooh, you are making me think of like an avoidant attachment style, which, we've had conversations around attachment styles. And again, so many of these conversations just feed right into the next because it all comes back to being self-aware, knowing how you're showing up so that you can truly live your best life, whatever that best life looks like for you. But a lot of us find ourselves frustrated at the end of the night, even if we have all of the things, because we have not addressed those deep down things. We are accustomed to sweeping them under the rug or distracting ourselves for as long as we possibly can so that we don't have to deal with our ish. Another way, and I'm going to step on some toes with this one, another way that we distract ourselves sometimes is volunteering ourselves for other people, taking on other people's stuff, as you said, making ourselves available, being that people pleaser, filling ourselves with other people's things so that, there's no time for us to sit with ourselves and be with ourselves. I saw on your page as I was preparing for this conversation, you mentioned that overextending, overgiving could be a trauma response. Explain that for the woman who's listening to this and just thought that she was just nice.
Okay. So I have this idea, this mindset that overextending, overgiving, being overly nice, yes, that could be a question of what are our boundaries and how do we manage those boundaries and put appropriate boundaries in place. I also believe that it can be a trauma response because for someone who has been traumatized by way of any form of abuse, whether in childhood or in relationship, you have also learned maladaptive ways to be able to protect yourself. And sometimes being able to protect yourself could be, let me be nice so that they don't hurt me. Or if I am nice, then I won't get hurt, which are these unhelpful connections that we've made to our past or unhelpful connections that we've made to our trauma. There are these cognitive distortions, if you will, that we have about if this, then that. And the truth is, you could be as nice as pie, you could be the nicest person in the world, but that doesn't necessarily protect you from trauma. That doesn't necessarily protect you from being abused or from being hurt or from finding yourself in a toxic relationship. And so it is an helpful, maladaptive way that we've learned to cope with our trauma, thinking I can protect myself if I'm nice.
Mm. So we had a conversation centered around the mother wound. If y'all missed episode 167, baby, where have you been? Go back and check in. But one of the edge snatching moments that, the clip went viral and everybody was just like, oof, you shaking the table, you talking to me, was when she said that for a lot of women who are super ambitious, success is a trauma response. And this was related to the mother wound, of course, but I can see that being the case, because for so many other reasons. In your experience working with, women as a therapist, what are some other behaviors that are common that we're just unconsciously kind of doing that could really be rooted in like some childhood trauma that needs to be addressed?
I love that mindset that our success could be a trauma response. The first one that comes up for me is financial trauma. That's not one that we talk about a lot. And I can speak to it. I grew up with a single mom, and not to say that having a single parent automatically equates to financial trauma, but in my memories, there was financial trauma there, but I didn't realize it until someone put a name to it, realizing that like, hey, yeah, you grew up in a household where there were some days mom had to scrape old purses to be able to find money to put food on the table. And so that can now create a situation where you've decided, like, I don't want to live like that anymore. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to work my ASS off so that I can always, quote, provide and put food on the table. But we know that you could work your ASS off and they can come in and say, all right, you are laid off today, that it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be protected. But again, we create these cognitive distortions based off of our trauma. And so another one could be the one that we've already mentioned, that if I could be nice, if I could show up and do all the things, then I am protected. And I'll even give you another one from my own personal experience. Growing up in a single parent household, the cognitive distortion that I had was, I'm not going to get married, or I'm not going to have children until I get married, because I don't want to be a single parent and raising children in a household that couldn't provide. When the reality is that we know that, like, you could get married, have children, and still end up as a single parent, still end up in a household where you can't provide. But our trauma creates a lens that makes us see the world in a certain way, and sometimes that view or that lens is unhelpful. It's not true, it's not rooted in facts. But healing, it changes that lens, and it helps us to open up that perspective to see things so differently.
I saw a quote that said, "Don't believe everything you think." And I
Mm,
think that that is appropriate because we will self sabotage. We will talk ourselves out of opportunities. We will swear that this is what she meant and what she said. What we will literally create entire narratives that have no basis on any type of truth, based on our own perceptions of ourselves, based on, how we were raised, what we were told about ourselves. Um, we need therapy, y'all, is the bottom line. Some form of therapy, and I'm glad we're going to get into the EMDR conversation as as another form of therapy that a lot of Black women, I think, and you can tell me if this is true or not, but have not yet tapped into, or not yet enough. But I want to go back to all of those being trauma responses for the woman who is on her healing journey. Because one of the things that we don't talk about, and I want to normalize this conversation of it being a healing journey and not a destination, is how much harder life gets once you start trying to heal yourself. Once you know better, you got to do better. Once you have those conversations about how you're really showing up, and you really want to take action to, make changes, then you're not going to allow yourself to repeat certain behaviors. You're not going to allow yourself to be around certain people. You're not going to allow yourself to do those same things knowing that you want something different. So once you have this revelation that, oh, I've been people pleasing because I used to try to please my mama and she didn't care, or I got these trust issues because my daddy never showed back up and I was waiting for him at the window. When you get to the root and you be like, oof, have that real moment with yourself, how do you coach women through it when ish hits the fan? Because it's one thing to become self aware, but it's something totally different to start taking action to fix that thing.
mm. Great question, and all relevant, all valid points. One of the first things I like to do, as you said, is to normalize. Is to normalize, like, yeah, this feels uncomfortable because it's working. Yeah, that you are looking at things differently because this working. And just as you believe that healing is not a destination but a journey, I believe the same. Like, I don't even believe that there's a such thing as the word healed. I believe that we are healing, we are healed-ish, because it is a journey, it is a destination. Even when we get to this place of, like, okay, I've met my goal, I've processed that trauma. Well, guess what? Now you're no longer attracted to the same people you were once attracted to. So now you're looking at your friend circle like, wait a minute now, do I really want to hang with these people? Now you're looking at the individuals that you used to date and think, I'm no longer even attracted to that type of person, because that's all part of the process and all part of the journey. And there's this saying, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like, that's where you are now. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's no going back. It's like deciding that, or realizing, like, you know what? When I eat gluten, it makes my body feel really uncomfortable, but then still deciding to eat gluten and live in that discomfort. It's like, no, I no longer want to eat gluten. And so healing is the same process. Once you know, like, people pleasing makes me feel uncomfortable, it makes me feel less than, it makes me feel unworthy. Oh no, I don't want to do that anymore. And so you're going to start prioritizing, how can I start showing up? How can I start communicating appropriately so that I am no longer people pleasing, because that is now making me uncomfortable and I'm aware of it. And so get uncomfortable, because ultimately that discomfort that you're feeling is bringing you closer to the peace that you can have within yourself.
It's like when you've dated 25 toxic men and then you get the one healthy one, and it's so uncomfortable because it's so different and it feels like, what the hell am I doing? But that's the healthiness that you've never experienced. And to your point, I've talked to therapists who were like, I've had clients that once they start healing, that husband is, they like their healing journey has led them to divorce. Their healing journey has led them to cut off, different foundational relationships that they've had. And that is not only uncomfortable for you, but it can definitely be uncomfortable for the people around you, once you start to start to shake things up. And to your point about, looking back at like the men that you dated, I believe we should all do this self-reflection exercise, because with men, it is just much easier to see when it's somebody you can literally like think up in your head or imagine a real example of. But when I look back at the men that I have dated, if I put them in a lineup, it is like a spectrum of mental illness, from a very low grade to like, girl, you could have been committed at that point. No healthy relationships. I mean, like, no healthy relationships. The healthiest relationship I had before my husband was probably the first boyfriend that I had at 14 years old. From then on, it was bad choice after bad choice after bad choice. And I can pinpoint what I was personally going through that even let me be okay with being in those situations. And so if we, are able to sit with ourselves and have those tough conversations with ourselves and really hold ourselves accountable to how we ended up in these situations, whether it's with men, friendships, career, we always find ourselves bumping into, bumping heads with the management. If we can start pinpointing the roots of some of these things, I really think that we can start, start really healing versus like going to therapy, but then not really acting on it, but saying we going to therapy because it sounds cute on the internet.
Right, exactly. And we can see the difference. We, as your therapist, can see the
Mhm.
difference. And essentially, you're wasting your time and your money by just showing up and not truly doing the work. And you make such a beautiful point when you say really sitting with ourselves, because I laugh as a therapist and a client. I laugh in the face of people who say, therapy, oh my gosh, something must be wrong with you, or that's for the weak, or that's for crazy people. I'm like, no, you're crazy not to go, because to sit with yourself is like, it takes such a level of courage, like to be that
Mhm.
introspective about your stuff and to own up to it. Woo, it is not easy, but it is so worth it.
It's not easy, and sometimes it seems impossible, because there are women who are listening to this right now who are like, "Yes, sis, I agree. I agree. I need to do better." And then that little voice is like, but when do you have time? But how are you going to fit it in? But so there's always that other side that's like, how are you going to adjust your lifestyle to fit this new belief that you have or fit this new goal that you have? So I want to share a post from your page, and y'all make sure that you follow her. I will put all of her handles below, but there's a post that you put up that says how ambitious high achievers can prioritize themselves over their work. And so earlier I mentioned, the women that have all the degrees on the wall, they are climbing the corporate ladder, or they have the successful business and seemingly they are successful, but they're really not prioritizing themselves. And it's like, well, how can you expect me to do that if I have no clue how to do that? So I'm about to tell y'all how to do that. This is from Melissa's page though. So quotes, I'm quoting her. So number one, setting boundaries. Okay. So if we are ambitious, high achievers, what does setting boundaries look like, Melissa? Because setting boundaries is one thing, but implementing those boundaries, not so easy.
Right. Setting boundaries looks like saying no when you mean no. Setting boundaries could also mean having the appropriate language, because we can say, like, oh, set boundaries, but what does that really mean? And so sometimes we need cues, or we need a cue card to be able to say, like, okay, well, okay, this person asked me for this. Let me go to my cue card and look, oh, okay, I'm going to say no. Or even practicing it in the mirror. Because the truth is, when it comes to setting boundaries, when you start to do it, it may feel uncomfortable. It may even feel squeamish, like, oh, I feel so uncomfortable saying this. But if you can practice it in the mirror or with a trusted friend or even with your therapist, role play saying it, you will get more comfortable saying it out loud. Because if you haven't done it, when it first rolls off your tongue, it's going to be like, that doesn't even sound like me. You're right. This is a newer version of you. And so you have to have safe spaces and places and people where you can practice these new tools. So that way, when you do have to use it, it just feels and it seems seamless.
Oh, that's good. Because when I see those posts on Instagram that's like 25 ways to say no, I'm like, oops, save. Because a lot of times it does come down to that discomfort and just not knowing how to say no. Most of the time, we know spirit is telling us, your intuition saying, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. And then out of your mouth comes, yes, sure. But if we just had some other phrase, to easily grab, I definitely think that that would be helpful. So number two, scheduling personal time. And talk about what that looks like for you, because I love that you are an example. You're practicing what you preach. So what does scheduling personal time actually look like for you?
Most ambitious, high achieving women like us, we live by our calendar. And we usually live by that understanding or that mindset. If it's not on the calendar, it's not happening. It's very rare that we're taking an impromptu call, an impromptu meeting. If that does happen, we're usually looking at our calendar to see if we're available. And so if
Mhm.
you know that you live by your calendar, then it would only make sense that you also put yourself on your calendar. Just like if you've called your beautician or your nail technician, you're probably going to put that appointment on your calendar so that you can remember it, because you don't want to miss it, because they're just as busy as you are. And so at the end of the day, why not put yourself on your calendar, whether it's your PTO, rather it's this is my day for quiet time, rather this is my day for fun, rather it's this is my date night with my man, rather it's this is my girls time with my ladies, or this is a time for myself. Until it becomes second nature for you, you need to put it on your calendar. The other thing too, in addition to that, is we commonly live on autopilot, and autopilot does include our calendar. And when we live on autopilot, we have to put something in place that's going to cue our brain to say, oh, remember this. The calendar is that cue. The reminder that we set on that calendar, whether we're setting that reminder 2 hours before, 2 days before, that is that cue to take you off of autopilot. So if you're not accustomed to putting yourself on your calendar, do it now. Put reminders so that you can remind it. Oh, Tuesday is the day that I committed that I'm going to yoga. Tuesday is the day that I said I'm going to sit in silence and do nothing. Because if you're not on your calendar, then it's not happening. The other thing I'll add to that is identifying what works best for you. We all operate differently. I've come to learn that I work best when I have my morning routine all about me and pouring into myself before I come into the office and pour into other people. I have a girlfriend of mine who's decided evenings work best for her. She's like, my job is so stressful. I need something at the end of my day to decompress. And so again, going back to what we've been talking about, Koereyelle, is getting to know ourselves, sitting with ourselves and saying, this is what works for me. This is when I should be on my calendar, because it's going to set you up for the most success. You've been successful in
Mhm.
your workplace. You've been successful in your business. What's stopping you from being successful with yourself?
Key word there, what's going to work for you. With so many systems and formulas and methods and all of the madness, it's easy to, and that's great that we have access to so many, resources, but it's easy to get caught up in the cookie cutter way of doing things versus being inspired by these methods or being inspired by that book you read and then figuring out a way to make it make sense to you. Because in the past, when I have tried to just recycle somebody else's routine or, word for word, say somebody else's affirmations, that don't move me. Somebody else's affirmations are not typically going to move you. And so you want to, take all of this information and advice and adapt it and, apply it to your life in the way that makes sense. If y'all missed episode 171, look at me shouting out these episodes. 171 is an amazing example of a morning routine. So if morning routine is what you're trying to get into, check that out. But again, make it make sense for you. Okay, Melissa, last point that I want to pull out from this post was delegating tasks, because when you're an artist and you sensitive about your ish, it's hard sometimes to put other people in place, to so that you can free up your time. And this can go for busy moms who don't want to hire help. This can go for, busy CEOs who are used to, doing certain things themselves. So how do you get over your own ish so that you can delegate for yourself?
Yeah, this is a beautiful question, and I'll share, and I'll also share a personal story when I had to realize it for myself. Um, I think we have to decide what's more important. The thing that we want to spend our time on, or keeping control over the thing that we're having a hard time letting go. Sometimes it is about control. And again, back to what we've been talking about earlier, sometimes that control or inability to be able to release that control can be a trauma response. But the other thing too is when it comes to delegating, you have to decide what holds more value, what's more important. And in this case, it's our time. Our time, it is priceless. We can't get it back. Once it's gone, it's gone. We can't even put a price tag on it. But my personal experience was, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a mom of three. When I had my third child, I was still a stay home mom. But even as a stay home mom with three children, I just didn't have enough time in the day to do all the things. And so my husband said, okay, like, what are the things that I can help you with? I see that laundry is piling up. And I was like, yes, like I can get it done. I just need help folding it. And so my version of like folding the laundry was my linen closet. You open it, all the corners match, all the towels are nicely lined up. His version of folding the linen and putting in the closet, towels are going in different directions. They're not all folded at the corner. And part of me would get irritated or upset, but I had to realize, is it better for me to go behind him and try to do all of that? And now I've, in a sense, wasted my time on something I could be using my time for? Or is it better for it to be done? Because we can get so caught in like, we want it perfect. We want it to look beautifully. Like at the end of the day, you are tired and you need it done. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but done is better than perfect. So deciding, what are you willing to release and what are you willing to gain as you're releasing some of those things that you're allowing yourself to delegate to other people, whether it's an employee or to a family member.
When it comes to delegation, done is better than perfect. Write that down. I also saw someone say that discomfort that you feel when you're first, delegating something, especially something to someone new, that discomfort is normal, it's natural, but your goal should be 80%. Like if they can do it 80% right, it is done well enough. They are never going to get to 100. They are never going to be able to duplicate it the way you do it, and you will drive yourself crazy trying to go behind them to fix it every single time. So instead of driving yourself crazy, as long as it's 80% done, let it slide, sis, and don't stress yourself out. In terms of wellness practices, because you do EMDR, I just feel like you are also interested personally, probably, and in tune with other wellness modalities. So, either what you've done personally or just based on your professional knowledge, what are some other wellness modalities that the ladies might want to consider outside of EMDR, which we're about to get into?
Yeah, I'm also certified as a Reiki practitioner. I am a fan of Reiki. Reiki is energy healing, if you're not familiar. And then I'm also a fan of sound therapy. I'm working towards my certification for that as well. So that's another modality that I'm a big fan of. And then we mentioned it earlier. I wouldn't call it a modality, but a way of living is affirmations. I think affirmations is a great way to be able to affirm ourselves either in what we currently are or what we are looking to become. And so affirmations can work in this is who I am or this is who I want to be, in a sense of like manifesting that version of you. And I'm also a big fan of not a modality, but tools. Journaling, I think, is a beautiful tool. Mindfulness, guided meditation, different breathing techniques. I think all of those are great tools. And one of my favorite, if we want to call it a modality, is moving your body. I am a huge fan of fitness. I'm a huge fan also of eating well. Because if we're doing all of this great work on the outside of us, moving our body, working out, going to therapy, but if we're not changing our diet, if we're still eating some of the foods that we grew up on, look, I was born in the Midwest, raised in the South. So there are a lot of foods that I had to release that were connected to my childhood to say, like, this is not in alignment with the newer, healing, I should say, version of me that I want to be. So sometimes it's in our diet as well. And so I believe in looking at things holistically from mind, body, and spirit. It's not just the one thing that you're doing, but it's a combination of all the things that you're doing because they're all interwoven and connected.
Truly a lifestyle. It truly has to be a lifestyle. And I'm on this whole well kept thing, like you being well kept, not just having yourself together in terms of, your outfit, but truly keeping yourself well through self-care, through self-love, through, starting or continuing your healing journey. When we talk about alternative wellness modalities. When we talk about acupuncture, when we talk about Reiki, when we talk about sound therapy, some of the Black community starts to get their panties in a bunch. I mentioned earlier that I hosted the Selfish Summer Summit every single night for 14 nights. We did a wellness workshop, and part of that was initially yoga. We didn't end up having the yoga workshop. It wasn't for my doing. We just didn't end up having it. But as the rollout was going and registrations was coming in, I literally received an email from someone that was like, "I love what you're doing. I was ready to sign up, but I went to the website and I saw that you have yoga." And that's against, my Christian beliefs. And so I'm just not going to be able to, attend, but I wish you the best with, what you're doing. And I want to know, what do you say to, and I don't know your religious beliefs. I don't know any of that, and I'm not trying to make any assumptions, but because this is something that you practice and because you are a black woman, I'm assuming you attract other black women, and this may be a conversation that you've had previously, but what do you say to the woman who was raised, with certain beliefs, but wants to explore some of these practices that may be considered demonic based on your religious upbringing?
Right. That is a great question. And I am a Christian woman. And I've even had, I won't share the person's name. I almost did, but I won't share the person's name or affiliation to me, but I recommended Reiki to someone that I know. And their response was to me was like, okay, I'll check it out. And then when they checked it out, they replied back and said, oh no, this is a big no for us Christians. And I just said, okay, if you need any other information, let me know. Like, I'm going to meet you where you are. It is not my goal or my role to transform you in that regard, but it is to be able to offer some additional modalities. And the other thing, too, that has happened in my own experience is that wherever I go, God meets me there. So, even for example, when I got trained as a Reiki practitioner, there's a part of the training where you do this guided meditation and they walk you through, like, you meeting, quote, your guides, like the person that's going to be with you on this journey. And you know who met me there? God. And when I went and had my very first Reiki experience, all of the, if you will, the downloads or the words of wisdom that I received, it was in the same voice in which God talks to me in prayer. And so we have to be open for the ways that God wants to meet us in prayer. One of the common, and this happens in therapy too. Like, a lot of people say, like, oh, well, why are you going to therapy? All you have to do is pray about it. Like, that comes up commonly in our community. And my reply to that is, faith without works is dead. Like, you have faith and you're praying about it. How do you not know that God said, like, okay, that's the therapist I want you to go see. I have prepared this therapist to be able to sit with you and to walk with you. Because the truth is, like, God will meet us in the spiritual, but he will send people to meet us in the living. And so we have to be open to these ideas. I think another one, and you use this word, and I used to use it too, which is alternative healing modalities. I had a woman on my podcast who is a Black woman, and she is she used to be a chiropractor, but now she does acupuncture only. And as we were talking to her about the episode, we had the idea to call it the alternative healing hat. And she goes, no, I think we should stay away from that. She goes, because when we use the word alternative, we give the impression that it's less than, or that it's not as valuable or not as important. And she said, I rather us use the holistic healing hat. And I said, okay, let's do that. And then, segueing just a little bit into EMDR, even when we think about EMDR, which we'll get into, one of the most or one of the biggest forms of EMDR is the bilateral stimulation. We have been doing bilateral stimulation from the beginning of time in our villages, whether it's through dance, in our community, whether it's through double dutch, in our churches, whether it's through the drum playing, or in villages when we're drumming. And so a lot of these modalities have stemmed from our ancestors, from the villages in which they lived in, but unfortunately, some of the Western world has gotten a hold of it and decided, how can we make money off of it? And how can we get people to pay for these trainings? When at the end of the day, moving your body is important. That could be spiritual. We see that in praise dance. Like, there's so many different holistic modalities that we can connect to our spiritual upbringing and understanding, if we could just allow ourselves to be open and all of the ways that God can show up for us in our life. And then I'll say one last thing, something that Tabitha Brown said in her book and that she speaks to openly in her on her social media. She said a lot of the miracles that we saw happening in the Bible why aren't those miracles still happening now? Like, they are still happening, but we aren't opening ourselves to this idea that those very same miracles that took place in the Bible can and are still happening in our world today. But we have tunnel vision, or we are solely looking at religion and spirituality based off of what the Western world has told us.
We would be fools to think that religion, like colonization, missed religion. You know, that there is not a deep rooted reason to keep us from what was originally ours, to keep us from what was being done in the villages. And even, you know, a lot of credit is given to Asia for a lot of the things, but even those things that we credit the Asian, you know, world to, a lot of those things come from Africa as well, but our history has been hidden from us. And a big part of the reason why they're able to get away with it is because we wrap it up in, oh, that's demonic. We wrap it up in, oh, you're going to go to hell. We wrap it up in, if you learn your true powers and who you really are, then you're going to be possessed, you know, by the devil. And so a lot of it is misinformation. A lot of it is, you know, just regurgitated information. You know, Granny said it was. I don't even know at what point in history. I mean, I'm sure this is like a post-traumatic slavery, you know, result of slavery at some point. But I would be really curious to know, like, at what point in history did it get lost? At what point in history did it go from this is what the medicine woman in the village is doing to this is evil, and you know it, that's a whole nother episode and a whole nother conversation.
Listen, you ooh, I feel you,
Baby.
and I want to get on the soapbox right there with you, because the other thing I'll add to it is the fear mongering that goes along with that. And if you can grow the herbs in your backyard to help you feel better or to heal you, that is not going to pay the pockets or line the pockets of big farm. Like you said, like, we could, that's a whole nother episode. We can go down that rabbit hole if we want to, but we have to do our own research. We have to learn our own
Mhm.
history, rather than taking the history of something that is, even to this day, still finding ways to erase it and to eliminate it from our schools.
Yep. Yep. Wake up, sis. Okay. Stay alert. Stay woke. So I want to get into EMDR, but I wanted to go there before we got into EMDR because I could just feel like someone would be like, something don't sound right about that. So for someone who's never heard of EMDR, hasn't even done a Google search yet, explain it like they're 5 years old.
Absolutely. So EMDR is an acronym. It stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And I know that's a big word. And it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing because it originated with this bilateral stimulation. The bilateral stimulation originated with using our eyes. And so as the client, you would be following the therapist prompt either with their hands, their fingers, or some sort of like wand or light, and you would be moving your eyes left, right, while focused on a specific trauma from either present, childhood, past, recent. And with that focus on that specific trauma, the bilateral stimulation would help to reprocess that trauma. So usually what happens when we have been traumatized, that memory, our memories throughout our day get filed. They get filed into long-term memory, short-term memory. When we're sleeping at night, that rapid eye movement, that REM sleep, is helping us to reprocess our day. When we don't get proper sleep, that day isn't reprocessing. And then two, even if we are reprocessing that day, the brain will say like, okay, you saw a lady walk by you with pink earrings. That's not helpful information. You don't need to remember that. We're going to reprocess that into long-term memory, or delete it. When we get traumatized, that memory does not get properly stored. So think about your brain as like a file cabinet, and you, being the ambitious woman you are, saying like, I'm gonna get organized, I'm gonna put my files here, banking goes here, checking goes there. When we're traumatized, that memory, when it doesn't get properly filed, it may end up in banking when it belongs in checking, or it may end up in finance when it belongs in self-care. And so when we are still actively activated by that memory, is because our brain, again, didn't reprocess it, didn't file it into its proper spot, and our brain is seeing it as, oh, this is happening right now, I need to protect myself, this is a threat that's happening right now. And you know, intellectually, like, no, that happened when I was 5. well, how come if it happened when I'm 5, then I always get activated or irritated by certain people that remind me of that thing? It's because your body is remembering it as if it's happening today. And so with EMDR and bilateral stimulation, it takes that memory, it focuses on it, and it says, hey, brain, you didn't reprocess this. This is old information. Let's take it from where it's improperly stored and put it into long term memory. And when that happens, the brain gives the message to the body and says, that's old information, sis. You don't have to remember it. You're safe and protected now. That person who harmed you at 5, that person is no longer in your life. You're good now. And then you're like, oh, okay. I don't need to be activated by that. My nervous system doesn't need to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn because this information is now being properly stored.
So does this only work for people who can pinpoint memories, or can this work for people who have, what's the word, where they've basically like buried the memory and they can't even recall it?
It can work for those that have buried the memory. The difference with EMDR, how it differs from talk therapy, is that you don't have to tell me the details. You just have to give me a word, a thought, a phrase, a feeling, an experience in your body that's connected to that thing. And we start there. And then as we're reprocessing, as your brain is bringing up that memory and we're igniting that bilateral stimulation, what's happening, which is different from talk therapy or any other form of treatment, is that in bilateral stimulation, we're igniting your left and your right brain at the same time. That's normally not happening. And that's what the bilateral stimulation does. It goes left, right, or right, left, right, left. And so we're tapping or using our eye movements to access both sides of the brain at the same time. And then from there ignites the healing. So you don't have to have the memory. You don't have to have the details. You don't even have to tell your therapist all the details. And that memory can be fully reprocessed. And what I've seen some clients say is, I don't even remember it like I used to. And they'll sit like, wait a minute, wait. I'm and purposely trying to go back to that moment and I don't even remember it like I used to. Or I've had clients say, I remember it, but it didn't happen like I thought it did. So what it may do also is it may open the lens for you. And I'll give an example without giving too much identifying information. I had a client who had memories of her mom leaving. And so she was sitting with that for a long time. Like, I remember my mom leaving me and I feel abandoned. But when we did the EMDR, that opened up the lens for her. And then her memory became, wait, yeah, my mom left that day, but now I remember my grandma being there and I wasn't alone. I was with my grandmother, or my mom left me in the best hands possible because she wasn't able to. So it helps to reframe what we thought was out to harm us, and maybe it was, but it helps us to be able to see it differently because now our nervous system has been calmed and eased, and it helps to open up that lens a little bit more with being able to process it.
So I was definitely about to ask, is this like a combination of talk therapy as well? Because how does the process work if I'm not talking to my therapist? If I'm not actively talking during this process. So I think that that is even going to be like a breath of fresh air for some people who are not comfortable with going and sitting on the couch and just crying your eyes out or pouring your heart out. But I've heard that EMDR is tough. So since you do both, would you say that it's tougher than talk therapy or no?
I don't know if I would call it tougher. It is more assertive, if you will, because talk therapy, we could dance around a whole bunch of stuff for years. But with EMDR, once we decide what that target is, guess what? The brain goes right there. We're not dancing around it. And it can be tough also because I don't want to paint a picture that like it's a perfect modality that it works 100% every time, because naturally, just as your nervous system has been trained to protect you, there are parts of us that protect us too. So sometimes when we're not feeling safe, or when we're feeling threatened, a version or part of us may come up and be like, hey, we're not doing that, we got to protect ourselves. And so in that moment, that's when the therapist has to say, oh, okay, I see that this version of you has shown up. This version of you needs something or isn't feeling safe and protected. Let's attend to that version of you so that we can get back to doing the work of EMDR. And so where the talk happens, EMDR is an 8-phase model. Phases 1, 2, 3, there's a lot of talking. I'm learning your history. We're doing an assessment. We are identifying what are your targets that we're going to be working on. And then we're also identifying what are the unhealthy thoughts connected to that target. Usually, those unhealthy thoughts are I am not, I cannot, it was my fault, I'm not worthy, I will never, some of those very definitive statements that we make to ourselves. And so we identify that first. So that does take some level of talking. But once we get into the bilateral stimulation, as we were talking about earlier, all of that internal work, all of that healing is happening on the inside. And so as your EMDR therapist, they're providing the safe space for your brain, for your body, for your spirit to do what it wants to naturally do, which is to heal.
So is this, I know with therapists, depending on like where you're licensed and where you practice, you can only, serve people in specific states. So I would love for you to share, what states you're able to work with clients in. And then I know you offer coaching as well. So for the ladies who have loved this conversation, after you share this episode with a friend, let them know where they can find you online. And again, I will make sure we include all of your website and your social handles below.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. I am on all social media outlets, Melissa Dumas. My website is melissadumas.com. I try to make it easy for everybody. I am licensed in the state of California to be able to provide therapy, coaching. I'm available worldwide. But even with therapy, I do have a program that's called EMDR Intensives, where I have clients that will come in and they will just work specifically on that thing. And so I've even had clients who have traveled out and I make it like a retreat. You come out and we are doing your EMDR intensive retreat. Once you land in California, your focus is just on getting to my office. Everything else is provided and taken care of, including your meals.
Is it covered by insurance?
Great question. So, therapy can be covered by insurance. EMDR intensives typically are not, because insurance puts a boundary on how many hours you can bill. And an EMDR intensive can be anywhere from 3 hours to 8 hours. And so, if you were to submit that to an insurance company, they're like, we're not paying for 8 hours of therapy in a day. Like, absolutely not. So, an intensive is not. But your insurance absolutely can cover therapy. I am not listed with any insurance companies, but I do provide my clients with what's called a super bill, which is basically a long receipt that you submit to your insurance company if you have a PPO, and they'll say, okay, we'll pay for this portion or we'll pay for all of it based on how the form is filled out. The other thing I do like to tell my clients is that your insurance will not pay for any service unless you have a diagnosis. While that can mean nothing to some people, especially our people of color, they like to know that up front. They're like, no, I don't want a diagnosis on my medical record. And some people are like, I don't care if that's my diagnosis, then put it on my medical record. But I like for my clients and for all of us to make an informed decision, so giving you all of the information so you can decide for yourself what's in your best interest.
Melissa, I appreciate you. I have absolutely enjoyed this conversation. We could absolutely do a whole nother episode titled The Rabbit Hole, and I might be circling back to do that. But I appreciate you for extending yourself as a resource, and just being an example of a well-kept woman who is not playing with her potential. So thank you for being here. Thank y'all for tuning in. Share this episode with a friend, and I'll see you next week. So, if you enjoyed that episode, I'm willing to bet you are absolutely going to get your entire life when you log on to everybodylied.com. Y'all, I just launched my brand new blog, which is for women like me who are stepping into the newness of life. Okay. Your girl got engaged, got pregnant, got married, and became a mom all in less than a year, and life came at me fast. As life was life, and I realized that a lot of the things that I had been led to believe were a lie. Survey says that was a lie. And so I am sharing all of my lessons learned and what I have discovered to be the truth, along with some resources on my new blog, everybodylied.com. Come on over if you are a woman who is experiencing the newness of life. I'll see you there.